I'm back. Back on the AirBandB clone and React. Lesson 12, destructuring props. Now, I recorded this yesterday along with lesson 13, props practice, and I got stuck. Halfway through it and I gave up. So I'm going to come back to it again. Do the lessons again. Can't remember it. So let's start again with destructuring props. This one was okay. I think the props practice was a bit problematic. So let's go at it with a fresh day and see how we get on. I'll see how I get on. Right, Bob. Tell us about destructuring props, will you, mate? Take it away. Right. 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 No. Now.
In the course, you should be somewhat familiar with the concept of object destructuring. However, just in case, we'll do a quick recap. Say I have an object called person. In ES6 and later, I can destructure the properties of that object in order to get simpler to use variable names. For example, if I wanted to log person.phone, I obviously could just use console log person.phone and everything would work just fine. However, in certain circumstances, it can be nice to destructure this object and pull out the property names for your own use. That looks kind of like this. I might say const, and then I'll use an object syntax, say image, comma, name, and then set that equal to person, my object. What that does is it declares two new variables, img and name, which I can then use in order to, say, console log the name. If I open the console, you can see I'm getting Mr. Whiskerson here. So that's the concept of object destructuring. The reason I bring that up is that it's a fairly common thing to do this in React with the incoming props that you receive. The parameter that you put inside of your component will be an object that represents all of the props that your component received. So what I could decide to do is just destructure that object immediately as I receive it inside of my function here, which means that I could say curly braces, image, name, phone, and email. It's important to note that I can't rename this to something else like image unless I do a little bit of trickery using colons, like image, colon, image. But we're not going to be too concerned about that for now. The point being, I don't get to change the name of the prop while I'm bringing it in. I need to make sure that it's exactly as the prop was being passed in at the time that the component was being rendered. If I decide to destructure my object like this, then I will need to change some of my code here. You can see if I refresh, suddenly I get an error that says props is not defined. So let me give you a challenge to fix it. Okay, your challenge is to fix our bug now that we've destructured the props object. Pause the screencast and work on this challenge.
Okay.
Well, by destructuring our prop...
Hang on a minute. Fucking hell. Jesus. Right. So he's destructured it. So you don't need this props thing in the front of the object name, would be my guess. You get rid of them all. I'll save. Yeah, missed that one. That'll from my iPod, AirPods. I've had a few glasses of wine. I've had a few sips of wine. Let's hear what he's got to say then.
Props, we're essentially declaring four new variables up here: image, name, phone, and email. So instead of props.image, I can just reference image and name and phone and email. I hit save and everything should be back to normal. Yep, there we go. The main reason I wanted to show this is just because you will certainly run into React code that either has the full object of props written here, or very commonly the destructured object, which pulls out each of the individual components, or rather properties, of the props object. Frankly, you can write it either way. In my own personal experience, I've experimented with both ways, and in the end, I've found it a little bit easier, in my opinion, to put the props object here and then reference props.image and name and so forth. The only reason being, if I decide to declare other variables inside of my component, let's say right here, it becomes less apparent which variables came in as props and which ones were declared inside of my component. So that's my reasoning for usually sticking to putting the whole props object. It does cause a little bit more of the clutter here by having props dot everywhere, but honestly, that's okay with me. Whichever way you choose, just try to be consistent with it. There certainly are other things that we will learn about props as we go forward, but now it's time for you to get your hands on the keyboard and start practicing the things that we've learned about props.
I would have thought it's more, let's get that back on. I thought it'd be more kind of intuitive, a bit bigger. Give this a proper object name rather than props. Essentially, it's a collection of objects. So maybe call that cats, like that. Have name property, object name property. Do that. Make it break by not completing the challenge. A bit smaller. Should break now. Yep. That's why I'd do it. Makes more sense to me. That's obvious that that's the properties. It's the object. Give it an object name. Cats. Works for me. Right, that was destructuring props. So mark that off as done on my little curriculum spreadsheet. Next up is props practice, which will be on the next video. So, laters.